Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us for another edition of our Engage webinar series. We have a very exciting topic today, and we have some exciting speakers. So today we have David Burnie from the Burnie Group, as well as Eli Federman, who has become our renowned host of our Engage webinar series.
Too kind.
Today we're going to be talking about measuring success, the most important KPIs for contact centers. So just a couple of things before we kick off. This session will be recorded and the webinar will be sent to all participants after our webinar series wraps up. So you will receive insights from all of the webinars that we've had. You're in listen-only mode during the presentation. Please submit any questions that you have via the Q&A. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, but you're welcome to send your questions anytime throughout our conversation. So with that, let's kick off. So Eli, first, could you tell us about the omnichannel approach to contact centers?
Yes, I'm happy to. So for those of you who are returning, by the way, it's welcome. It's really nice to talk to you guys again. So let's get into KPIs and contact centers. This is a very metrics-oriented part of any organization, and it's really important that the right things are measured. So from an omnichannel standpoint, when I'm thinking about KPIs, there's essentially 4 channels that really fit in and ones that we stay real close to in terms of the work that we do. One is the IVR. So having a key suite of KPIs against how to measure IVR success. And then the 3 channels that continue to get the most attention, certainly with our clients and colleagues of mine in the space, are for phone, email, and chat. SMS and text is starting to get some traction, and there are a number of companies who have them introduced. It's a little bit slower on the benchmarking and decision-making front around what is the ideal set of metrics for that channel, but I would suggest the first 4 for today are the primary when it comes to omnichannel and KPIs.
And Eli, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. For those who don't know, I'm the founder of Burnie Group, founded back in 2011. And contact center and omnichannel are key areas of focus for us at Burnie Group. Eli, I'm curious, a lot of clients that we meet with, they will have a very large focus on the omnichannel and thinking about live chat, email, IVR, etc. Do you have a sense for how much migration to these other channels has happened? Is phone still important? Is it still relevant?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, Dave. So we do a lot of benchmarking, primarily in financial services. And so specifically, I'll say for that industry, what we're finding is over 90% of interactions are still taking place on the phone. Now, when I say that, that's extracting the IVR. So if we just think about assisted channels in this case, phone, email, and chat, the phone continues to dominate. That's shifting a little bit by industry. In some retail, for example, certainly online ordering of any kind, chat is making some really good headway. But phone is still the predominant channel. The other point I'd make is, certainly in our conversations, Dave, with clients, the phone isn't going anywhere. Even with automation and all the maturing of technology and Chat GPT, when it comes to, I'd even suggest, moderate problem solving, I personally believe that the phone will still be the primary choice for most of us, regardless of demographic. So for me, it's about figuring out the right channel for the right scenario, and also keeping in mind how much customers appreciate having choice.
Yeah, one of the things that I found interesting as we emerge from the pandemic back to normal life is that the pandemic really pushed people to that phone channel, because you could no longer go in to a retail location, to a branch. Mm-hmm. And it feels like some of that behavior is sticking, so that people are now more conditioned, if they're having issues, rather than going to a branch or going to a retail location, picking up the phone and calling. So if anything, the phone channel and the other related channels like live chat, email, etc., are more important than they've ever been.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. I mean, retail or the in-store or in-branch is outside of the contact center space, but certainly in financial services, it is a major channel. And there are still many of us, not me in particular, who will still, value that in-person experience. And I would also suggest that so many of us, as we're kind of returning to this new normal, I think we value that in-person experience more than ever. On the rare occasions I'm still being serviced in person, I kind of appreciate it a little bit more. So in some ways, it wouldn't actually surprise me if specifically in banking, there is this desire to maybe have a bit more intimate in-person contact moving forward.
And have you noticed has the nature of interactions changed? I know that a lot of our clients have really focused on self-serve and finding ways to let clients and customers help themselves. So for an address change, rather than calling in or going to the IVR, they can go onto their website and make an address change there. So are you finding, as you think about those different channels, has there been a change to the nature of queries that are coming in?
I don't know if, I think depending on the industry and depending on where we were during the pandemic, inquiries certainly would vary. Certainly in financial services, questions picking up anything related to my finances, mortgage, loans, credit card, fraud, those certainly had their peaks and valleys. But I think certainly from my lens, when it comes to self-serve, that is still a huge push, regardless of industry. I tend to influence and push clients of ours to really be thinking about all kinds of transactional, easy to do transactions truly do belong for the most part in self-serve, and really rethinking what's the ideal interaction around phone, email, chat, and now text. And for the most part, that tends to go around that moderate to more complex problem solving.
Right. So if anything, that increases just the importance and the complexity of that phone channel.
It does. And to that point, having the right KPIs in terms of how companies are measuring their success around those channels, specifically phone, becomes as important as ever.
Okay, so I think that we're off to a great start talking about omnichannel experience. Let's dive into key performance indicators. Let's talk about which KPIs are most significant for contact centers.
Great,
so,
thanks, Bernie. And Eli, I just
go ahead, Dave. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to call out some of the great work that you've done. I know we're in the midst of our third year of our banking contact center benchmark, which has just been a fantastic piece of work. So some really good insights as we get into KPIs to speak to what's actually happening out there in the market. So yeah, over to you. What are some of the KPIs that you see as being most important?
So this is a highly matrix business, as I'm sure all of our audience is very intimate with. And I would suggest typically, like, for example, we benchmark in and around the neighborhood of 40 different KPIs. And I would suggest that most of those KPIs have actually been around for a long, long time. So there's kind of a mix between traditional KPIs and some of those which would apply would be average handle time, hold time, work time, occupancy. When we think specifically about productivity and speed, average speed of answer, service level, we think about other channels such as email, measuring the time in which it takes to acknowledge an initial inquiry from a customer. Chat has similar metrics to phone in terms of average handle time, average speed of answer, abandonment rate. We get into attrition, retention, ESAT. So there's so many.
That's a lot.
It is a lot. And so the way that I think about it is, and I hope this is helpful for the audience, I think about three concepts when it comes to managing a contact center. I think about speed, quality, and resolution. And that's kind of how I try to simplify the approach to measurement. Within each of those areas, there are one or two really core KPIs that, assuming you've got the right technology and the right reporting framework, you can track and measure. So when we think about speed, quite simply, average speed of answer and or service level will always give you a real-time view as to how long customers are waiting in queue. So that is the starting point for speed. On the quality front, there's two components. One is having some form of transactional survey that's done frequently, so you have enough samples to make something of it, and asking a series of questions related to how the customer perceived their recent experience. It doesn't have to be more than 3 to 5 questions, but it needs to be quantified. There is also Net Promoter Score, a very popular KPI that is used by many of our clients, and we fully support. I believe that as long as that's augmented by additional customer satisfaction measurements, you get a really nice holistic view. And then the other piece is what you do internally. So having the right quality program, whether you're, for example, listening to calls, observing chats and emails on your own with an actual team, or you're using very highly capable, mature speech analytics and AI type technologies to do it, you need some form of output that's going to give you something that you can measure, manage, and work with. So for me, speed, quality, and finally resolution. So on the phone side, first contact resolution, call resolution, the key is to have the right definition and also leveraging the survey that I just mentioned. As well as for email and chat, you can also apply an inquiry resolution measure. So those are the 2 or so KPIs that I think about across channels for speed, quality, and resolution as a starting point.
That's great. So maybe we could dive into those in a little bit more depth, because I'm sure our audience is really interested, what does great look like? So maybe we start with speed. As you think about average speed of answer or abandon rate, what does great look like? I know average speed of answer, as an example, you can actually be too fast, which would demonstrate that people have too much capacity because they're just waiting for that next call to come in. Mm-hmm. And it probably depends a little bit on the inquiry type, so that people are willing to wait longer for certain types of inquiries. So what are your thoughts around maybe some best practices that you've seen?
Well, let's talk about speed. I've had discussion with a number of senior executives in the last little while, and there's this outstanding question around what is the right speed of answer. The answer is, Dave, I don't think there's one right speed of answer. I do think there's a number of factors that come into play, including industry, customer type and profile and spend. What I would offer is some very healthy guidelines that I think are very current. And so when I think about all the data that I've seen and how customers feel when they're waiting to speak to someone, let's just start with the phone, as it's still the most popular channel of choice. I direct clients to think about getting to a phone call in 60 seconds or less. If you can get to a customer within that 1 minute mark and subsequently provide a really good experience, which includes inquiry resolution, you are still going to hit a home run in terms of your assessment if you're doing a survey, for example, post-call. So thinking of coming under 60 seconds is the starting point. The second and equally important component is staying at 60 seconds through your hours of operation as best as you can. So here's where contact center management can get very tricky. And it's in and around, okay, I might have a service level that says 80% of the time I'm going to answer the phone in 60 seconds. But what you do in that other 20% can be highly meaningful around how customers perceive you, depending on when they call and if they're going to be part of that 20% versus the 80 that's assuring that 1 minute or less. So having really good workforce management principles and practices around interval management, strong partnership with operations, and an ongoing good view to what's happening each and every day when calls are coming in remain key. So that would be my guidance around the phone channel and a starting point for measuring speed.
Awesome. Okay, so let's maybe take a look at quality. As you've seen, having done a ton of benchmarking, a lot of work with different organizations, as you think about Net Promoter Score or customer satisfaction, what do you typically look for to say you're doing a great job?
I would suggest this one is even trickier because Net Promoter Score can look a lot different based on industry.
Mm-hmm.
What we see is, so if your Net Promoter Score is 55% or better, you have leading results. Anything north of 60 is often considered global best practice. Depending on who you speak to and what part of the globe, there could be some variation, but when you're north of 55%, you are doing exceptionally well with Net Promoter Score. So NPS is fairly easy in terms of a guideline. Most of our clients tend to fluctuate anywhere between 35 and 55. So a lot of variation in industry and then within industry by line of business or queue type. So NPS is the easier one. Customer satisfaction, there isn't really one metric or source that says you should have, let's say, a 4 out of 5 if you're doing a CSAT survey, or a 90%. I think there's a reality to doing 85% or better because we're kind of just programmed around this notion of 80% plus. For me, it's more so about asking the right questions and having a methodology that allows customers to give a truly transparent, helpful answer that leads to insights to drive action. That for me is a bit more of the story when I think about the right customer satisfaction metric beyond NPS.
Right. And given how unique each organization is, it would be tracking over time. So you're essentially benchmarking against yourself to see when there are major dips in scores or if actions you've taken have really resulted in improvements.
I would agree. I think the NPS, because there's so much available benchmarking data, that is the comparative to see how you're doing, let's say, against your peers or global best practice. Customer satisfaction, for me, I would agree, is more of an internal measurement when you're looking for incremental improvement, essentially every day, and looking at that benchmark over time.
Right. Okay, and then let's talk about quality. And so I know that some talk about first call resolution. We like to think about first inquiry resolution.
Yes.
Talk a bit about what really good contact centers would be able to achieve in that metric.
So in terms of a metric, call resolution, global best practice, 80 to 85 or better. First contact resolution, 70% or better. With all the global statistics I've been fortunate enough to see, if you're in those areas, you are doing exceptionally well in terms of resolving inquiries. There really isn't any great benchmarking data on email and chat, and certainly not text. And mostly because it's kind of hard to measure. You end up just naturally with email, for example, there could be 6 to 8 exchanges, and it sometimes can be very difficult to resolve in one. Just based on the nature of that channel. Chat, a little bit easier. There just isn't a lot of great history on these channels. So, from my lens, I look in and around the same in terms of benchmarking. So keeping in mind this notion of just pure resolution for chat and email is key. And if you can hit around that 80% mark, you're doing quite well. But it's certainly not as robust with information and savvy like the phone.
Great.
The one thought I'd make, I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
I was just, you started talking about a few of the different channels. I know there's been a lot of interest from clients recently about IVR, and we've done a lot of work in the IVR space. So I'd be curious, or I'm sure our audience would be curious to understand from an IVR perspective, what are some of the metrics you like to think about, and what does good look like?
Great question. And that has been a very hot topic for us of late. So one of the easier metrics to maintain, and this assumes that you're doing any kind of self-service in the IVR, is containment ratio. So what percent of customers called into the IVR and never left? There are other ways to measure, again, depending on your technology and your reporting capability. What part of the IVR did customers leave at? How much time did they spend in a given part of the menu? How often did they have to repeat themselves? Were there moments, if it's a speech-enabled or natural language processing-enabled IVR, where there was a communication breakdown? This is where typically enterprises that we've worked with, others that I know of or I'm in touch with, it's a bit more difficult, and I don't see quite as robust measurement. Containment ratio is kind of table stakes. And then the second component, there's typically a survey, which I very much support, much like a customer satisfaction survey on the phone or another channel. This one's all about the IVR. So the ability to know that you can easily exit if you want to speak to someone. How many, did the experience feel relatively effortless, which often with the IVR is not the case, just depending on structure and how you can sequence through menus. Did you have to repeat yourself? Were you able to resolve your inquiry in the IVR? So for me, it's about developing a similar set, 3 to 5 questions, and having a unique survey about that experience, in addition to the containment ratio to form a more complete performance picture.
Great. Now we've talked a lot about KPIs that impact the customer experience, and I think that when we're working with clients, that customer experience is just so important in understanding how you're doing. Often there's a need to have a focus on efficiency as well.
Yes.
It is important to not only deliver well, but also deliver efficiently and manage your costs. So as you think about contact center efficiency, what are some of the key metrics that you would look at, and what are some of the best practice contact centers out there able to deliver?
So a couple are always top of mind, and these are highly traditional metrics, but they're still very effective. So one is occupancy, just understanding how a frontline employee is spending their time on any given day, I think is super helpful. Understanding the time that's spent when they're interacting, and this applies to all channels. So being able to measure, and we'll call it an average handle time for phone, email, and chat, or SMS, is all relevant. So having a benchmark there is key. There isn't really a metric I can share that says you should have a handle time of this, because it varies incredibly by channel and by business. So that's something a little bit more difficult to do. The areas that I tend to encourage our clients to focus on is on hold time and wrap time, specifically with the phone. Those are 2 areas that I find most enterprises still struggle with. And because there's a lot of behavior and process and technology that drives that activity, it's typically ripe for optimization opportunities. Right. So those would be just a few in terms of day-to-day for efficiency.
Hold time is an interesting one. What are some of the, if an organization is seeing high hold time, what are some of the potential root causes for that? And what are some of the things that an organization might do to get that hold time down?
So there's 2 things when I think about hold time. One is, if you're going through a cycle of hiring a lot of new employees into role, just naturally when they graduate, there's going to be higher hold time. No matter how proficient they are when they first graduate, naturally they're going to take longer to seek and find information and navigate their technology. So that's understandable. Where I start to focus clients of ours in on is those that are proficient and still have high hold times. So if you take away the exception that when you're in a high stress environment where you just can't achieve your service level and it's a call after call syndrome, as I'd refer to it, frontline employees, and understandably so, are going to use hold and after call work to catch their breath, and that's fully understandable. When that's not the case, for me, it's about employee behavior. Do they have the right tools, and skills around how to multitask. And as simple as that might sound, in my experience, it's not. So being able to navigate with a customer online, I've probably spoken to 3 or 4 contact centers in the last 10 days, and everyone had the same start. Can I put you on hold for 2 to 3 minutes? And for me, that is just not the opening that I'm looking for. Keep me informed, keep me in the loop, and have me part of your experience. And I'm going to feel a lot better about what's going on because I have a bit more control. So there's the employee piece. And then I'd suggest there are also systems and technologies that just don't work fast enough or get stuck that force frontline employees to take more time in both of those categories.
It's amazing how quickly the time is going.
I just saw that myself. It's 12:26.
Before we leave the KPI, the KPI discussion, I would love to just get a quick thought on employee engagement, because we just know how important that is. What are some of the metrics that you look for to understand whether employee health is good with an organization?
Yeah, that's a huge one. Probably the hottest topic right now that I'm seeing in our space is how to keep talent. So I'd say, please measure attrition and measure it in 3 different ways. Measure those that are being promoted internally, which still applies to your contact center footprint, but a good news story. Those that leave, external, and look at first-year attrition. That's something that gets missed. We've been benchmarking that with some of our clients, and it's been super helpful to understand what's happening in those first 12 months. So attrition remains a paramount KPI around figuring out how to keep your employees where you'd like them to be, which is with you. And then the second one,
is there a target number you would look at?
Oh, absolutely. If you can get to 15% or less every quarter, amazingly, you're doing quite well. If global best practice would be 5 to 7% or less per quarter. And when I say these numbers, I'm now talking about typically large enterprises of at least 250 frontline employees. But yeah, you can be less than 30% in a year. You are doing exceptionally well.
Great.
Okay. I'm going to move us to our final question. And for our audience, if there's anything that you'd like to ask, you can put it in the chat right now. And if we don't have a chance to get to it, then we will answer your question when we're sending out all the videos afterwards. So our final question is, how do you bring all of these KPIs together to measure the success of your contact centers?
So I think it's a great question. The first thing is to figure out what's important to you to measure. I mean, as I sit here and talk with a global lens on what others are doing and how I feel about them, all leaders in their teams need to figure out what's important. I know some contact centers that might only measure 3 to 5 KPIs and let their employees figure it out. I get that too. But the key is figure out what are the right KPIs for you to measure, whether it's 2, 6, 8, 25. And moreover, develop a scorecard that's meaningful, easy to understand, and it's enabled and supported by really helpful reporting and tracking tools. And define a cadence that allows you to be fully transparent with your frontline employees about performance. Those would be some guiding principles to keep in mind.
And I would add to that, Eli, to say that once you've defined those, then benchmarking yourself against others can be really helpful.
Absolutely, yes.
And we've seen that with one-time benchmarks where we have a great data set where we can work one-on-one with organizations and they can give us their data and we can tell them how they're doing. Or we've often entered into industry benchmarks where a collection of industry players will agree to submit their data, and then we will feed it back and share with them how they're doing versus the average and versus best in class.
Yeah, terrific way to close the discussion, Dave. Yes, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. It's been super helpful for our clients. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to wrap the conversation. Thank you all for attending, and we hope that we'll see you again on May 3rd. For the final edition of our Engage webinar series. So that is going to be the makeup for the webinar that we had to reschedule a few weeks ago. And it will be a conversation between Eli and Marco from Bell about how interactive voice response shapes customer experience. So if you were interested in the KPIs related to IVR, then this was, and any of the KPIs, especially related to customer experience, then this will be a really relevant and interesting conversation for you. So
yes,
we hope to see
come and
you
join
for
us for this one. It's
final-
Marco's very entertaining, and it'll be a lot of fun. It's a hot topic these days.
Plus, it's going to be a big party since it's our final Engage webinar, at least until we kick
Yes.
off the series again next fall. So we hope to see you all then, and thank you for attending today.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.